God loves to ask questions. You guys know that a really good boss or a parent or a leader, they ask questions, they don't make statements. Questions draw you in. They make you own what's being said, what's being thought about. Statements, they don't do that. They put you on the defensive, don't they? But questions, they bring you in and make you part owner in what's the conversation is all about. My dad and my sister, they had an interesting story one time. My sister had been pushing curfew the last few weekends, and I don't remember what her curfew was, 11 or midnight or something, but she had been just, a few minutes late or just, kind of testing the waters. And so Dad had warned her and said, if it happens one more time, your keys are mine. And so she was on notice. Well, we live 10 miles out in the country, okay? And in western Oklahoma, it is flat and there's no water, okay? So you can see there's no trees, there's no hills, there's nothing, okay? It's a beautiful place. And you can see into town from my house, 10 miles out, you can see the street lights. It's no problem. You just see forever at night. And so Lori, she's coming home and she's pushing curfew again. She's, doing it. And she's got this old Suburban. It was hilarious. It was like, I don't know, our grandma's or something. And so she's got this thing roaring down the road. And the thing is, like, she's coming really fast. She's breaking the law. Let's just say that, okay? She's coming home. Well, Dad stayed up. And he wanted to know if she's going to do it again. She comes in, pulls in the driveway, and there he is. He's standing in the living room. She barely made it, 11:59. She made it. And he said, statements versus questions, right? What does he ask her? He said, how fast you drive? Now, she knew that he wasn't in the car. There's no way that he could ever know, right? And so, and students today, you got like these apps like Life 360 and stuff like that track you, and your parents know how fast you're driving, where you are all the time. We would have never survived back then, would we? No way, man. Mm-mm. Well, how fast you going? I was driving the speed limit, Dad. Good night. Well, what she didn't know, like I said, you could see, okay? From town, it's 6 miles on Highway 95 north of town to the turn to our house coming west. And it's 4 miles from that turn right to our house. And he could see 4 miles down the road whenever she turned. Took his watch, and started timing her. And he knew the amount of time she took. So in the morning, he got up, he drove down to the corner, and he punched it. He was doing 80, 85 miles an hour. Didn't even come close. Didn't even come close to making her time. Questions. She had an opportunity. Questions over statements. God asks a lot of questions, but here's the thing. Why would God ever need to ask a question? He doesn't. That's the thing, right? Like if he knows everything, anytime God ever asks a question, it is never, ever, ever for him. It's for us. Right? Adam and Eve, they sin. They hide. They realize, oh, we're naked. They hide from God. God says, well, you remember the question? Where are you? Where are you? He knows, right? He knows. He wants us to own our own stuff. He wants us to own it, right? Where are you? Moses, I want you to go save the people. He's like, man, I don't know. What if they don't believe me? He's holding the staff. He goes, what's in your hand? Staff. He said, throw it on the ground. Comes a snake. He's like, they'll believe you. Elijah just had this amazing experience. God answered by fire on the mountaintop. Remember that story, right? The people of Israel realize that they've been following a false god, and so they go and they just kill all of the false prophets and everything. And well, the queen, that was her people, right? She loved those prophets, and so she got mad, and she said, if Elijah's not dead by sundown, she threatened him. So he runs. He's like, oh man, he takes off for days to get away from this girl. And he goes to the mountain to meet with God. And what's the question that God asked him? He doesn't say anything. He doesn't say a statement. He asks a question. He says, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And he wants him to talk. He wants him to have some input on this. Remember Jonah? Jonah's mad that God is going to have mercy on these guys, on the enemies of the Israelite people. He's going to save them, have mercy. And he says, and he's mad, and God says, hey, is it right for you to be angry? He doesn't say, hey, you need to chill out, man. He doesn't say it is not right for you to be angry. He says, is it right? Questions always trump statements. Well, Adam and Eve, they had two sons. Remember them? Cain was the older, and Abel. Cain was a farmer. Abel was a rancher. And so Cain and Abel both brought some gifts to God, some sacrifices. And it says that Cain brought, and the word was some of the fruits. He just kind of brought whatever he thought was, whatever he could spare, the leftovers. But then it says that Abel brought the best, the fat portions of his livestock. And so God took favor on Abel's sacrifice and did not look with favor on Cain's. And so Cain gets mad. He's the older brother, right? And now he's humiliated. His younger brother's getting elevated. And so he's angry. He is angry. And God saw what was rising in his heart. And he tried to stop him. He gave him pause. He talked with him. And he asked him to think about his choices. But Cain's mind was made up. And he lures him out into the field. And he kills him. Premeditated first-degree murder, the worst kind. And it was the first time blood had been spilt in the earth whenever somebody was murdered. And so God shows up an hour later and he says, where is your brother? Where's your brother? That question gives us pause today. Some of our family is easy to love. Who's that for you? Some of your family is easy to love. And then some of your family, right, is harder to love. If I say some of your family is easy to love, you probably can picture a face right now, right? And then if I say some of your family is harder to love, you probably most definitely have a face to go with that, right? Hopefully they're not sitting right next to you. You know what I'm saying? Every single one of us has family that's harder to love. But let me ask you about this. What about not just family, but what about the people around us? The people in your neighborhood. Maybe you have some neighbors that are easy to love, and maybe you have some neighbors that are just not so bueno, Maybe at school, you have some students in your classes that are easy to love, and some of them that are just, they're so annoying, right? Maybe at work. Again, easy to love, hard to love. We all have, in every area of our life, you have somebody that's easier to love and somebody that's hard to love. For almost 2 months now, we've been going through this series through one paragraph that Peter wrote in the Bible. One paragraph. It's a powerful paragraph, and it's like this. It gives us the keys. It gives us keys. This one paragraph gives us keys. It's a list of things that he says to add into our lives, into our faith. And he starts listing off these things to add. And it's like he's taken these keys and he's given us these keys to a complete and fulfilling life. There's this kid in the preschool during the week down here. And it's incredible. He loves keys. I don't know, but he loves keys. And so he'll ask you to see your keys. So I took out my key ring and I gave him the keys. And so he starts like looking at them. And he's like doing this, and looking all around it, and feeling it and touching it and everything. And then he says, what's this one to? And I said, well, that one's to, I'm getting kind of nervous, like, why are you asking, little kid? Church key, this opens up everything, in the church. This is my house key. This is my garage key. This key, I don't know why, but we have one door in the church that has a whole separate key for it. There's nothing special in it. It's like balls. I don't get it. But one special key for that door. Anyway, like 4 months later, no lie, 4 months later, Not minutes, not hours, not days. 4 months later, I'm walking back. And he's like, hey, can I see your keys? Yeah, sure. Give him. He said, this is your house key. Excuse me? This is the church key. And he said, that key that goes to that door in the church. And I was amazed. I was like, how in the world? How did you just do that, right? Like, this is amazing. Like, this kid, he knows the keys. And what Peter is saying is, he goes, these keys, these things in your life are keys that's going to open up doors of opportunity in your life. You don't have to have them. You can leave the door closed if you want to. But if you will add these to your life, it's going to open up doors in your life that's going to change your life. And so look what he says. Each word is a key. Look at 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5 through 7. It's just one paragraph, but it changes everything in our life. Look, it says, for this very reason, make every effort. Look what he says. Make every effort. He's convinced. Make every effort to add to your faith. And then he starts on this goodness. And to goodness, knowledge. He's like going through the keys here. To knowledge, self-control. And to self-control, perseverance. And to perseverance, godliness. We talked about that last week with Sean. And to godliness, mutual affection, which is what we'll talk about today. And to mutual affection, love. Now, I want to just say, these last ones, mutual affection and love, if you're going through your keys, these are the house keys. Mutual affection and love. These are the ones that you're going to use every single day. These are the ones. These are the pinnacle. Mutual affection and love. Now, Peter wrote that paragraph. Remember who Peter was whenever he found Jesus. He was struggling. He had been fishing all night. And remember how much he caught that night? 0. And Jesus, he didn't really know Jesus. And Jesus says, look, hey, go put your net out into deep water. He's like, dude, I'm cleaning my nets. I'm done. But something about it. And so he says, all right, fine, I'll go try. And then he catches all these fish. And he's like, this guy has some keys. And so he finds Peter whenever Peter is missing some things in his life. And he turns it and he says, now I don't want you to fish for fish. I want you to fish for people. I want your life to be about more than just fish. So look, let me read it one more time. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. Let me just bear with me as I read this one more time. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, to mutual affection love. Let me ask you, what in the world is mutual affection? That's so weird. What is that? Well, it was not written in English, it was written in Greek. You might realize that. But the word that he wrote there was Philadelphia. And we all know what that means because Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love, right? But in reality, we know that Philadelphia is not, oh my gosh, those guys, they're brutal. And do we have any Eagles fans in here at all? No? Good. Man, they don't belong in church. They're the worst. They're the worst. Do you guys remember whenever they booed Santa Claus? Santa came to their game and they booed him. And then not only did they boo him, they assaulted him with snowballs. It was uncalled for. Check out the video.
The fans were in such a bad mood, none of us wanted to see Santa Claus to begin with.
It's a bad game. It's a cold day. They're sitting in their rear ends in snow. And here comes this lousy little Santa running down the field. So they start to boo.
You hear the booing. You hear it. And I said, well, I understand what's going on here. They're not booing me. They're just booing Santa Claus. They're booing everything. He was a sitting duck. I mean, you could have imagined that there was going to be trouble just because he was so close. As I was starting to walk back, I saw the snowball starting to come, and then I started getting hit with them.
And all of a sudden, Santa Claus is dodging and ducking, and there's a full stadium full of people just wailing away at Santa Claus.
I actually remember feeling a little twinge of anxiety that they might really hurt Santa. I remember watching a fella make a snowball and throw it at me, and I just walked up to him, at the bottom of the wall there, and I said, "You're not getting anything for Christmas."
I love that. So if it's brotherly love, then why did the NIV say mutual affection? Why didn't they just say brotherly love? Well, the next word is love, so they didn't want to be redundant. In English, we have like one word for love. You guys have heard this before, but in the Greek, they had several words for love. And so this one, brotherly love, is Philadelphia, and the next word is agape. Okay, so it's two separate words, but in the English, it looks like the same. And so they named them different so it didn't look confusing. But Philadelphia it means brotherly love. Agape, the next week, it means sacrificial love, right? So you're like, okay, well, what's the difference there? And brotherly love is basically this: who to love. And agape is how to love sacrificially, right? And so the question is who is my brother? Who is my brother? And Jesus had someone ask him this very question. You know, they said, who do we have to show love to? And then what does he tell them? Do you guys remember the story of the Good Samaritan, right? And that's what he responds with. You know, and he says, you have a Jewish guy walking away from Jerusalem, and he gets beat up and robbed, and he's half dead on the road. And then you have two other Jewish guys that are walking down the road, and they see this guy, and they're like, no, and they walk kind of away and around and don't bother with that, right? And then you have a Samaritan that comes by, and he's a political enemy of the Jewish man. They don't get along, and then, of course, he comes and he helps them. He takes care of the guy, and he says, who was the neighbor? And they all say, well, it was this Samaritan. Who was it? And Jesus said that we are to be the latter. We are to be that guy, right? We can't boo Santa Claus, is what that means. Good thing his reindeer didn't show up. They'd have had venison at halftime. But the point is that brotherly love is not easy all the time. That's the point. Brotherly love is not easy all the time. In fact, it can be really hard. When God asked Cain, where is your brother? He responds with, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Or in other words, do I have to take care of my little brother all the time? Am I a babysitter? And the truth is, it's not easy to love your brother all the time, but it is the mark of Christianity. Loving our brother when it's hard, that is the mark of Christianity. Jesus addresses this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 43. You'll remember this. He said, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. See, the first is natural, right? Love those who love you, right? But the second, that is tough. And he says, pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Now he says, I'm not asking you to do anything that God doesn't already do. He says, your Father in heaven, he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So not everybody loves God, but he still blesses everybody. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Don't even pagans do that. See, he's saying, like, loving our brother, right, is not going to be easy, but when it's not easy, that's when you start showing your Christianity. When it's easy, that's just being a human. And he would prove that whenever he knelt down to wash Judas's feet the night that Judas would betray him. Do you remember what Jesus said after he washed not only Judas's feet, but all the disciples' feet? Do you remember what he said? In John 13, which is just an incredible chapter in John, in verse 14, he says, now that I, your Lord and teacher, like up here, right? Like now that I created the universe, okay? I have done this. He said, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, so also you also should wash one another's feet. He said, you do it too. If I'm doing it, then you ought to do it too. Someone said the test of Christianity is not only loving Jesus, it's loving Judas. That is clearly different than what was required in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the measure of your faith was your vertical relationship with God. The offerings that you brought, the sacrifices that you brought, the law that you upheld, it was vertical, right? You kept all those things and you were in right standing with God. But when Jesus came, he changed everything. And there's one sentence in the Bible that changed everything for everyone, everywhere. It changed everything for everyone, for everywhere. It's probably the most consequential verse in the Bible. And it's John 13:34. Check this out. He says, a new command I give you. And anytime somebody says a new command, right, ears perk up a little bit. Like, excuse me, who gives commands? Only God. And Jesus said, a new command I give you. We're doing something new here. He says, love one another. Love one another. It's not just a vertical thing anymore. It's a horizontal thing now. You display your love for God by how you display your love for each other, especially when it's hard. If you want to say that you're a Christian and you're following God, you have to show love to his other children. That's the point. That's the mark of Christianity. And then he qualifies it. And he doesn't just say, love one another. Then what's the next few words that he says? He says, as I have loved you. That's the qualifier. And so then you ask the question, well, how did Jesus love us? Well, just right after he says this, he goes to the cross. Right? He washes his disciples' feet. He washes Judas's feet. And then he goes to the cross and dies for their sins. And you're like, whoa. That's a lot of sacrifice. And Jesus said, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. How we treat our brother is how we love God. And then he says, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples. By this. This is the mark of Christianity. It's not church attendance. It's not what you give. It's not what you know about the Bible. It's none of those things. That's not the mark of Christianity. The mark of Christianity is how we treat each other, especially when it's hard. And so, let me ask you a question. Jesus said we should stake our reputation on how we treat the world. So, how are we doing? You know? How are we doing? Do we have a great reputation for how we love the world? I mean, that's what he said. He wanted our reputation to be staked on. And then let me ask you, how are you doing? Are you somebody that is known for love? Are you known for that? Is that something that marks you? It's how you love others, especially the hard ones. It's a much simpler way to live than all those other laws, trying to keep those laws, right? But it demands more. There's no loopholes. Everything comes through John 13:34 now. But all this means, all this that's been said, it's pretty simple. And it just means basically two things. Number one, look around. Look around. Who is around you that needs love right now? Who's someone that is needing love? And also, who is somebody that is hard to love, right? Who needs your love right now? Where is your brother? I had a kid in the youth group that was just extra. Oh my gosh. This guy, every time we played a game, he just ignored the rules, and you're like, dude, you're out. And he's like, no, I didn't get tagged, or no, man, you're done. No, that wasn't me. That wasn't me. And you're just like, dude, can you just please, the whole thing is not about you, man. But it was. Everything was about him, and nothing applied to him. And he's also goofing around and always trying to get people to pay attention to him, and and he's just tough, man. And I've had some of those kids roll through youth group. It was none of your kids at all. Your kids are awesome. But we did have some Eagles fans that had a kid in the youth group, and it was terrible. But it turns out that he was struggling with himself. You know what I'm saying? It usually, a lot of times you can read that in a kid, and he was struggling with his own self-identity and his own self-worth or whatever. And so a few of us decided, you know what? He's here. And why is it that the bad ones are always the most consistent ones? You know, like, take a break from church, man. But he was here every week. And you know what? We just decided, you know what? We're going to just show him love. It doesn't matter what he does. We are going to show him love. And so we just showed him love. Hey, man, glad you're here. Hey, man, you're out. No, that wasn't me. I'm like, all right, man. Well, I'll tell you what. You are out, but we're super glad you're here. And you just kept telling, fake it till you make it, kind of thing. But the crazy thing happened is, like, when he started receiving love, all of a sudden, he started to be comfortable with who he actually was. And he stopped the whole, like, charade stuff. He stopped the whole, like, putting other people down in the youth group. And he started just, like, being there, right? And it just changed. It was not overnight. But over the next couple of years, the kid changed, and he became one of the coolest kids in the youth group. But it started with him receiving love. He was just not one of those kids that was just going to get chastised and be like, you know what, actually, now that you're, like, being mean to me, I realize the error of my ways. He was a kid that needed to be loved for who he was. And it changed him. Do you guys know who G.K. Chesterton? He's a British author. He wrote this: love is not blind. That is the last thing that it is. Love is bound. And the more it is bound, the less it is blind. See, real love is to love someone as they truly are, to vow to love them no matter what else comes. The other one is love. It's just love, especially when it's hard. Love, especially when it's hard. So you're going to look around and see who's out there, but number two, you're just going to love, right? Especially when it's hard. At middle school summer camp this summer, we had a speaker named Chris Simning, and he was incredible, guys. He was incredible. He told a story. He was disabled, and so he got on stage, and it was hard to hear him because he couldn't talk right, and he couldn't walk very good. So all the middle school, you had to zone in. You had to be quiet so that you could hear him. And he told this story. He said that he was born normal, but one day in middle school, he woke up and he couldn't hold up his head, right? It was just, he couldn't hold it up. And so they took him to the doctor, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. Over the next 2 years, they finally diagnosed some super rare disease. I couldn't even tell you the name of it anymore, but through his years in middle school and then into high school, he started to lose the ability of everything, to be autonomous in anything. He couldn't walk. He couldn't move his arms or legs. He couldn't. He told a story about how he couldn't feed himself after a while. It wrecked him, right? Obviously, it was rough on him. He became depressed. He was in high school, and the youth group rented a houseboat and was going to do it on a lake for a weekend, do a retreat, and everything. And this kid invited him to go. And he didn't want to go. He didn't really know too many kids in the youth group. Plus, on a houseboat, what's he going to do, and and everything. But this kid Jimmy just kept inviting him. And Jimmy was a really good football player. He was the star, actually, of the team. Set records. It was really, really good. But he was wanting to show love to Chris, and so he got him to come. So Chris comes to the trip, and so he's there, and they're all sleeping, and he's kind of laying down in a sleeping bag, and one of the medications that he takes has a side effect of and diarrhea is what it is. And so he's sitting there, and then all of a sudden, about like 2 or 3 a.m., he realized, oh my gosh, I have to get to a bathroom, but he's stuck in the sleeping bag. He can't go anywhere. And his wheelchair's not even next to him. It's all the way across the room, and then even if it was, he's not strong. He can't pull himself up, and so he's just... And then he has an accident, and he messes himself right there in the sleeping bag. And He's mortified, terrified. He just wants to go home. He doesn't know what to do, and he only really knows Jimmy. And so he starts calling out, like softly, like yelling, kind of like, Jimmy. And nothing, and says, Jimmy. He just keeps yelling out, Jimmy. And finally, Jimmy does wake up, and he comes over there, and he's got tears in his eyes, He said, Jimmy, I had an accident. Of course, Jimmy can smell it, and everything. And so Jimmy unzips his sleeping bag. He bends down, and he scoops Chris up and gets his arms all in the mess and picks Chris up, and he's got him all over himself now. And he just carries Chris to the showers. And for the next while, he just cleans the filth off of Chris. And Chris stood on stage and he said he didn't ever say one word. He said he just cleaned the filth off of me. And see, Chris was sitting there just bawling in the shower. Let me ask you a question. All those awards that Jimmy got and those records that he set, those are cool, right? Those are awesome. But what is more honoring? Those are honoring for sure, right? But what is more honoring than to have a guy stand up 30 years later and still telling the story of how in the time that he needed him the most, that he stood up and he knelt down in the filth and washed the filth off of him. Brotherly love is not always easy. In fact, the harder that it is, the more like Jesus you are. Someone said our lives aren't just measured in years, they're measured in the lives of people that we touch around us. Jesus reached down into our filth and he cleansed us. You do the same for someone else. He humbled himself by washing the feet of Peter and Judas, and then he took it even further and sacrificed his life for them as well. One returned to love Peter, and one never did. Judas never did, but he still loved him. Will you do the same? Who is around you that love requires you to humble yourself and serve them? Listen, no act of brotherly love in the name of Jesus will ever be regretted in heaven. It will be honored. Let me pray. Jesus, we love you so much. And we thank you that you cleansed us, that you reached down into our filth. And I pray, God, that you would help us do the same for someone else. Help us be the Jimmy to somebody else. Help us to love, especially when it's hard to love. God, we love you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.